Hi everyone, welcome to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel, promoting mindful communication growth through conflict. And this video will also be released as a podcast on anchor.fm under the name CAOS, which is my business name, where I'm based in London in the UK. So today what I'm going to talk about is the use of mediation within the university community. I first started working with universities about 12, 13 years ago. And as time's gone on, there's been more and more different areas in which mediation can be used within that context. And I want to go through some of the examples of that in this video. So really, particularly campus universities, but any university really is in itself a community. And so anything that can kind of support that community being more cohesive through practices and processes such as mediation can be very useful. So I want to try to highlight the different ways in which mediation can be used or has been used within that context, so that you can get an understanding of the many different ways in which it can be useful and supportive of both staff and students, so that it kind of enhances the student experience for those attending. And then there's also a third area, which is the use of mediation between the university community and the community in which it's located. So obviously, again, you might have a lot of universities that are based within a town or a city, and there's a local community that are not connected with the university. And sometimes there can be difficulties between those two communities. So for example, where students live out in the community, just as a simple example, if they have a student party and the local residents are affected by it, that can be a dispute area as well. And it's what can sometimes be called the town and gown distinction, or the town and gown disputes. But what I want to do is go through the three different kind of areas. So student disputes, student staff disputes, or student university disputes represented by members of staff, and university community types of dispute. So if I start off with student to university disputes, I know that wasn't the order I said it, but let's start with that, because in a sense that's the journey that I went on. When I first started providing mediation for universities, it was for complaints made by students about their university experience, and that might have been over things like whether they felt that there was sufficient access to perhaps their tutor, and the sense that that was affecting their learning in a situation, and so they would make a complaint to try to kind of ensure that they were getting the kind of access to tutors that they were seeing themselves as having a right to. And in other situations, it might have been that people had a particular need, a special educational need or a mobility need, and the student might have felt that they weren't being given full access to what they were entitled to, or the support that they felt they were entitled to. And obviously in some situations like that, it might be thought, well, that's a legal issue, that there are rights under the Disability Discrimination Acts and Equality Acts, etc. And that's absolutely true. There are certain rights that are established in law, but in some situations there's an ambiguity about the extent to whether the university is or is not fulfilling it. So it may not be that it's absolutely not providing access, but it's about the extent to which it is. And so a court may not be able to always find in favour of the student. And so there can be a purpose to at least trying mediation to try to resolve those kinds of difficulties. And obviously if it works, no need to pursue the legal action, and if it doesn't work, the student still has the right to pursue the legal action. And obviously where it can be resolved through mediation, that's better for everyone. both cost wise but also stress and time wise. It's a much better and more effective way of dealing with those situations. In other situations, it might be a PhD student who doesn't feel fully supported by their supervisor. In other situations, it might be things like the extent to which students feel that their, how can I put it, a kind of their identity is represented in the learning. So there can be a lot of issues around whether particular cultures are represented in a kind of an equitable and fair and kind of respectful way in learning materials and resources. And in some situations, there can be mediation over things like that. And that's where obviously it's starting to cross over into things like equality and diversity and inclusion related challenges. And again, with all of these, there may be cases where it's actually more appropriate to go to court over these things where they're very distinct and clear. But in other situations, mediation can be useful. And as I say, mediation ideally is always available to try to resolve these things without going to court. But obviously, in some situations, it's more clearly distinct than others. And so court is the only appropriate option. But where there's ambiguity, or there might be a wish to engage across the different kind of groups, the different claims in the situation, then mediation is obviously very useful in that kind of context. So that's some of the areas in which student complaints mediation can be provided. In other situations where it's kind of a dispute between students in the university, but it's a root a dispute between students. There's kind of two particular areas where I'm aware of and have been involved in that. One is student accommodation disputes, so disputes between newly arrived students, perhaps living in university accommodation, and they're not getting on and they fall out, and there are perhaps allegations of bullying or isolation or domestic issues, and people fall out and they take the complaint to the university, and the university is often in a difficult situation like that because, again, unless there's a very clear, distinct kind of action which would mean eviction or perhaps kicking off the course or police involvement, where it's about the falling out between the young people who are living together, there's very little they can do to take action against one or the other because it would be seen as, perhaps unfair. Why choose one and not the other when they're all involved? So that's where mediation can be very useful in resolving that. But there is also some training that I do for people in what's called peer-to-peer resolution support facilitation, where we train university staff to facilitate discussions between people in a way which prevents it having to go to an escalated level. So it's not quite the same as mediation, but it draws upon mediation skills. So that's an area in which mediation skills or the ethos or the approach to mediation can be used, but it's not actually a formal mediation process, because it may be kind of a bit overkill to bring in mediation in those kinds of situations. Another area where, in a sense, it is between students, but it does involve the university as well, is in student group work disputes. As most people will perhaps be aware, students are often assigned group work, or given group work assignments rather, and often there can be challenges in how the group members interact with each other in order to fulfill their assignment. And while the tutors or other university staff can't kind of take over the assignment for people, if there's a breakdown in the relationship, what they can do is support resolution of the difficult relationship without contributing to the academic activities in the group work, so that they can start to be able to work together more effectively. So that's another area where we train people in peer-to-peer resolution support, but it also is another area where mediation type skills can be used within a university context. Other areas in which mediation can be used obviously includes staff-to-staff workplace disputes. Now that sometimes can be between academic staff, but it can also be through between administrative and other non-academic staff. So I provided mediation in a wide range of different contexts there, whether it's between senior academics who've fallen out over things to do with things they've said in meetings or things they've said in shared emails, etc. In other situations, it can be between academic staff, perhaps people who kind of oversee the arrangement of courses but don't actually teach them, and and kind of related areas. Obviously, I can't be too specific about things because of confidentiality, but that kind of thing about how people are interacting in order to try to arrange courses and to facilitate them being able to kind of operate ongoingly. Mediation between caretaking staff and kind of what's the word? Yeah, caretaking staff, people who are kind of making sure all the rooms are set out correctly, and kind of different equipment is put in place, etc., etc. So mediation in that kind of context as well. So, yep, staff to staff dispute mediation within universities is another area. Another area that actually interesting, I've done quite a lot of these within a university context, is group disputes, and with very different kind of teams or groups within universities. Examples of utility staff, so groups of utility staff who've fallen out over different things. So groups of anywhere between about 8 and 15 people where there's been a difficulty. Kind of groups within universities, so like religious groups. There was a difficulty once that a religious group had with the university, and there was an opportunity for them as a group to engage with the community. So that was kind of, I think, about 8 to 10 people involved in a difficulty there. Again, I won't say too much detail about it because it would risk becoming a breach of confidentiality, but just issues over the kind of support or kind of access of religious groups to particular resources within the university. In other situations, concerns about, again, kind of equality and diversity issues, and kind of group disputes around that. So group disputes also something which is taken up quite a lot by universities. And in a way, understandably so, because if you've got a department that perhaps isn't operating very well, or as well as it could be because of a group kind of team breakdown experience, or you've got a group of utilities workers who are, falling out over, I don't know, I mean, the different issues about kind of making sure all the rooms are available, making sure particular equipment's put in place, making sure that all sorts of things are maintained, etc. That's obviously going to have a wide effect on the university as a whole, because if people turn up at rooms and they're not ready because of some kind of fallout or miscommunication, then that has a knock-on effect for both the staff and the students at the university. All sorts of things where group disputes can also be facilitated through mediation at universities. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the other area that where mediation can be used. This isn't something I've specifically been involved in. Well, actually, no, I have actually in a kind of a different in a previous role as director of a community mediation service, where there are disputes between members of the community in which the university is located and students. So basically that was noise disputes about student parties, or the extent to which students were kind of looking after the off-campus accommodation that they were living in. So maybe they were living in a student house, operated by a local landlord, and they were having parties, or they weren't, behaving as the local people might have wanted them to, as students may sometimes do, although of course as local residents also sometimes do, but because people are students, sometimes they get a bit of a kind of a stigma or a label attached to them. So disputes in that kind of context as well, between the university members, or your students and staff, and the local community itself. Um, so that's another area in which mediation can be provided within, or for the university context. Um, so as I mentioned, there are a wide range of different areas in which it can be provided: in equality and diversity issues, in student experience issues, just about their experience of being involved in their course or where they're living, um, their interactions with staff, the interactions between staff, things like allegations of bullying, which can obviously occur between students, but also between staff, or even between staff and students, in both directions. That staff can feel bullied by students as much as students might feel bullied by staff. So there's no kind of one context for that. So a wide range of different areas in which mediation can be used within the university context, and also of course conflict coaching as well, which is one-to-one support. I've done conflict coaching with students who felt challenged by a relationship that they have with somebody else, whether a staff member or another student. And conflict coaching is just one-to-one support to help people to kind of talk through what the conflict is, what it is they're finding challenging, how they may be able to address it in a different way, how they can support themselves within the challenge of that relationship. So conflict coaching as well is also something that can be used within universities. So really, for me, all three types of support that I provide as someone involved in conflict management is something that I've have provided within a university context, whether it's training. So I've trained teams of mediators within universities. I've trained teams of conflict coaches within universities. Um, I've trained people to do what I described earlier as facilitating peer-to-peer resolution. So it's about staff learning how to help students have a conversation between each other in a way that's constructive when they've fallen out over things like student accommodation disputes or group work disputes. Um, uh, and so I hope this is kind of illustrate there's kind of a very wide range of areas in which mediation can be used within the university context. Um, so yeah, if that's of interest, I hope it has been. If it's of interest for you to kind of take that kind of thing further yourself, if you're working in a university, or you're a student in a university, or you're a staff member, or you're working in an HR department in universities, or equality and diversity department, or student complaints section, or the accommodation section. All of these are areas where people have used or drawn upon what mediation and other support offers. So yeah, if you'd like to learn more about it and maybe take up that offer, particularly if you're based in the UK, then please let me know. But I hope the video has been of interest to you anyway, just to kind of give an outline of the many different areas in which mediation and conflict coaching, etc., can be used within a university context. As always, please like the video if you liked it. It helps to look good in YouTube's eyes, so that they raise it up the rankings. Please subscribe as well if you'd like to hear more, um, and see more of these videos. Please make a comment below if you've got a question or a comment about the use of mediation within universities. Perhaps you've tried it yourself, or perhaps you've got a question about it. And as always, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.